This is, I think, a pretty important story. This is Tulsi's third strike here. That'll be the nickname for this piece here. So on March 14th, Tulsi Gabbard tweets out the following: Our nation's intelligence community must be focused on our national security mission. Politically motivated leaks undermine our national security and the trust of the American people and will not be tolerated. Unfortunately, such leaks have become commonplace with no investigation or accountability. That ends now. We know of and are aggressively pursuing recent leakers from within the intelligence community and will hold them accountable.
Jane, you ignorant slut.
Yeah, exactly. So it seems rather likely that one of the big leaks that she is referring to here is this one. So this was an article that came out in the New York Times a week after that tweet went out based on information that had been leaked to the Times in February. So it seems she was almost certainly referencing this. Intelligent assessment, she was referencing a few other leaks too, but this was a big one that has reared its head again and again since then. Intelligence assessment said to contradict Trump on Venezuelan gang. So to invoke wartime deportation powers, President Trump asserted that Venezuela's government controls a gang. U.S. intelligence analysis think that this U.S. intelligence analysts, pardon me, small font, think that is not true. So, of course, the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act would require that those on the receiving end of these deportations are an invading force, which would mean that Maduro must have sent them in order for the Alien Enemies Act to have been legitimately invoked for these purposes. And this first round of leaks says that there are a lot working under Tulsi Gabbard who feel like there's no evidence for that, and therefore the Alien Enemies Act is improper in this context. So we'll read a tiny piece from here. President Trump's assertion that a gang is committing crimes in the United States at the direction of Venezuela's government was critical to his invocation of a wartime law last week to summarily deport people whom officials suspected of belonging to that group. But American intelligence agencies circulated findings last month that stand starkly at odds with Mr. Trump's claims, according to officials familiar with the matter. The document, dated February 26th, summarized the shared judgment of the nation's spy agencies that the gang was not controlled by the Venezuelan government. Once again, in mid-April, we had more leaks come out by more leakers, which you would call leakers whistleblowers or leakers, depending on whether you like them or not. But more whistleblowers, I would argue, leaked to the Washington Post. U.S. intelligence contradicts Trump's justification for mass deportation. So once again, the National Intelligence Council, drawing on the acumen of the United States' 18 intelligence agencies, determined in a secret assessment earlier this month, once again, this was mid-April, that the Venezuelan government is not directing an invasion of the United States by the prison gang Tren de Aragua, a judgment that contradicts President Donald Trump's public statements, according to people familiar with the matter. The determination is the U.S. government's most comprehensive assessment to date, undercutting Trump's rationale for deporting suspected gang members without due process under the Alien Enemies Act. Trump invoked the act in mid-March, proclaiming without evidence that Tren de Aragua is perpetrating an invasion of the United States at the direction of the regime of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The intelligence product found that although there are some low-level contacts between the Maduro government and Tren de Aragua, the gang does not operate at the direction of Venezuela's leader. The product builds on U.S. intelligence findings in February, first reported by the New York Times, that the gang is not controlled by Venezuela. The National Intelligence Council is the analytic hub of the U.S. intelligence community that reports to DNI Tulsi Gabbard. It is composed of veteran specialists in particular regions or topics known as national intelligence officers and produces classified assessments meant to represent the assessment of all U.S. spy agencies. The people familiar with this assessment spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss confidential intelligence matters, which of course prompted Tulsi to once again, a second time, tweet out, politicization of our intelligence and leaking classified information puts our nation's security at risk and must end. Those who leak classified information will be found and held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Today, I referred 2 intelligence community leaks to the Department of Justice, for criminal referral, with a 3rd criminal referral on its way, which includes the recent illegal leak to the Washington Post, which we just read you. These deep state criminals leaked classified information for partisan political purposes to undermine POTUS's agenda. I look forward to working with the Justice Department and FBI to investigate, terminate, and prosecute these criminals. So these deep state criminals she's talking about, the deep state criminals are the ones who are saying now for a second time at that writing, hey, this claim that Tren de Aragua is essentially an invading army is not a legitimate claim. And based on that claim, Trump is exercising mass deportations without due process. So basically, we're undermining the constitutional rights of those on U.S. soil in the name of some emergency that we're now saying for a second time in a second batch of leaks does not exist. That is not an endorsement of the gang. Maduro himself claims that the gang is an instrument of Western powers to sow discord in his country, as we'll get to in a moment. We don't know whether that's true or not, but the bottom line is there was no evidence to suggest, according to what we know and what these whistleblowers know, to suggest that this is any kind of invasion, that is just hysteria being generated to justify shredding the Constitution. Now, before we get to strike 3, let's take a step back in time to 2019 when the same Tulsi Gabbard, apparently, insists the U.S. must stay out of Venezuela and let the people determine their own future. U.S. meddling in Latin America has been disastrous for the people of the countries where we intervene. Pence's demand is inappropriate and dangerous, referring to Mike Pence's insistence that it's time for action against Maduro. And Tulsi was, of course, called a Maduro toady for having done that, but no more. She is a team player now. And here we go. So today, this was fairly big news. Spy agencies do not think Venezuela directs gang, declassified memo shows. So a 3rd time where we're hearing that this whole Alien Enemies Act is based on total bullshit. A newly declassified memo released on Monday, that'd be yesterday, confirms that U.S. intelligence agencies rejected a key claim President Trump put forth to justify invoking a wartime statute to summarily deport Venezuelans to a prison in El Salvador. The memo, dovetailing with intelligence findings first reported by the New York Times in March, states that spy agencies do not believe that the administration of Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, controls a criminal gang, Tren de Aragua. That determination contradicts what Mr. Trump asserted when he invoked the deportation law, the Alien Enemies Act. Once again, in case anybody is unclear on this, in order for it to be an invading army, it will have to have been directed here by a foreign government. That's why Trump is insistent on saying Maduro is sending the gang members here to destabilize America, which just think about the ridiculousness of that claim on its face. Now you have the 3rd piece of whistleblowing / leaking / intelligence finding, depending on who is demagoguing for what purpose, saying, no, this is not happening. While Venezuela's permissive environment enables TDA to operate, the Maduro regime probably does not have a policy of cooperating with TDA and is not directing TDA movement to and operations in the United States, the memo said. The memo's release further undercuts the Trump administration's rationale for using the Alien Enemies Act and calls into question its forceful criticism of the ensuing coverage. After the Times published its article, the Justice Department opened a criminal investigation and portrayed the reporting as misleading and harmful. The administration doubled down a month later after similar coverage in the Washington Post, which we just showed you, citing the disclosures in both articles as a reason to relax limits on leak investigations. The document, known as the Sense of the Community Memo, that's this last document released yesterday, was released by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence in response to a Freedom of Information Act request by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. The foundation provided a copy to the Times. Lauren Harper, the Daniel Ellsberg Chair on Government Secrecy for the Foundation, said the memo was at odds with the administration's portrayal of its contents as a dire threat to public safety. The government almost immediately declassified the same information in a response to a FOIA request, she said. Ms. Harper continued, the declassification proves that the material should have been public from the start, not used as an excuse to suppress sharing information with the press. But administration officials continued to defend Mr. Trump's policies. So here's Tulsi Gabbard's new statement on this. It is outrageous that as President Trump and his administration work hard every day to make America safe by deporting these violent criminals, some in the media remain intent on twisting and manipulating intelligence assessments to undermine the president's agenda to keep the American people safe, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, said in a statement. So I remember the argument for Tulsi Gabbard as DNI was that she was going to root out this kind of secrecy and corruption within the organization to make sure, one, that it's more transparent, and two, that it actually works on behalf of the people. Now you have on 3 separate occasions whistleblowers coming out saying the deportation policy is based on a non-existent invasion, and this invocation of emergency powers is based on total nonsense. And on 3 separate occasions, she does the exact opposite of what her champions said she was going to do when she went there. She just toes the party line and insists on using the law, weaponizing the law against the leakers, saying that they are a threat to national security and that these leaks undermine national security. What all of this information suggests is what is plain as day, which is that the Alien Enemies Act was, of course, an absurd overreach. Courts have ruled that, right? I mean, it's not just these leakers who are coming out with evidence to suggest this. This has been struck down in courts as well. And here you have Tulsi Gabbard going to bat on 3 separate occasions saying, no, shut up or we'll find you. Shut up or we'll find you. What our version of events is the correct one. And finally, here's Nicolas Maduro in March warning President Trump, or I should say pleading President Trump to get to the bottom of what he claims is the real function and purpose of Tren de Aragua, which was a tool of the Biden administration to destabilize his government, to turn the United States against his government. The Biden administration used the campaign of Aragua's train issue. I have a very clear position about that. I tell President Donald Trump with respect, ask for reports from the last 4 years of FBI and DEA. Forgive some of the crudeness of this translation, although I say Maduro is much more podcast friendly. He talks a lot slower than Netanyahu, so we don't have the same problem.
The Israelis have to talk faster to catch the lie.
Yes. From the offices in Colombia, so that you can see President Trump, who financed it and moved to the famous train of Aragua. Those people took him to Colombia. Those people took him to the United States. Ask for veridical reports so they know here in Venezuela we defeated, dismembered, and ended with this group of violent criminals who intended to be used from Colombia with deep ties against the former Biden administration. Again, forgive the crudeness of the translation. In order to bring terrorism into Venezuela. We get the drift of what he's saying. If there is anything that can be said about terrorism on Aragua's train issue, an extinct one, because they wanted to attack cities around the country, and we avoided them. Look, intelligently, with action, President Trump. Ask for those reports that you can see. Tell it to you sincerely and respectfully, so you will be able the truth about the famous Tren de Aragua. Our migrants are not criminals. They're not bad people. They were immigrants as a result from sanctions. Good people, hardworking, and in Venezuela we welcome them as productive forces with a loving hug back to the homeland. So he's saying, look, not only does this gang not work for me, but we tried our best to rid ourselves of this gang. And he claims that the gang is an instrument of Western fuckery to do what we have tried to do to his state for years, which is to dismember it and sow chaos within it. And so whether that claim is true or not, we can't tell you for a fact. But we can tell you, based on everything we're seeing, based on the preposterousness of the claim that he is using this gang to as an invading army against America, I mean, that's just absurd on its face. Add to that 3 different intelligence leaks saying emphatically there's no evidence to back this up. And you have the Trump administration, in this case, Tulsi Gabbard, coming out on 3 different occasions, not only telling them to shut up, but threatening to prosecute them if they don't show up. All of that evidence points squarely against this hysterical narrative that we're being invaded by an army of gangs, and this is the exact playbook of the George W. Bush post 9/11 Republican Party. The exact playbook, which is we're being invaded, we're under an emergency threat, we're invoking emergency powers intended to trample your constitutional rights.
Right.
That's exactly the same. Hey, you know what? A more recent example that so many Trump supporters are emphatic about is the COVID example, declaring an emergency as a pretext to trample constitutional rights. They're all red-pilled about that, but about this, they're the same hysterical, paranoid lunatics that the George W. Bush Republicans were, and that they say that the COVIDians were, which is, well, we need to shut everything down because there's an emergency. We're all going to die, right, of this virus. We're all going to die in terrorist attacks from Muslim men from Arab countries. Well, now it's, hey, we're all going to get beaten up and killed by these immigrant gang members. It's the same paranoia. It's the same hysteria based on very, very thin to non-existent evidence. We're seeing this happen again, and once again, you have this group of people who were supposed to be different from the Bush era GOP. This was supposed to be the alternative to George W. Bush Republicanism. They seem to be swept up in that same frenzy.
Yeah, Maduro certainly is giving that speech for domestic consumption and maybe for international consumption. I'm sure he is not naive enough not to realize that Trump is making this claim in order to justify the invocation of an Alien Enemies Act that the situation certainly does not require, call for, and is not constitutionally sound. So this is simply his, listen, he could look at the records and, it's very obvious I'm not directing this gang. As far as Tulsi goes, who knew that a literal director of a psychological operations unit, literal commander of a psychological operations unit, who has bent with every political trend blown wherever the wind takes her for best opportunity, literally you could pretty much find her saying 2 different things about everything you can think of. Who knew she's a complete scumbag? I mean, we knew, that takedown we did is going to age very well. It's already aging very well. What did Marcus Aurelius say? All these Stoics now are so into Marcus Aurelius.
Yes.
You would think they'd be familiar with perhaps his most famous quote. How do you know a thing? By what it does. Tulsi Gabbard made it very clear through what she was doing that this is exactly the person she is, that she has no integrity. She has no moral center. How do you go up and talk about Donald Trump being Saudi Arabia's bitch and then become Donald Trump's bitch?
Right.
That is a person of absolutely no character. Now, I'm not going to lie, to be honest, man. I'm not going to name any names, man. But a lot of our friends fell for the Tulsi thing. Is it still going to be a golden age of journalism? I'm waiting for that. Are we still going to have a golden age of journalism under the Trump administration because Tulsi and the rest of the fucking criminals that decided to glom onto Donald Trump for career advancement are going to take on the deep state instead of just use the deep state as a buzzword to become the deep state but deflect the kind of resistance to that primarily came from this base, which is why again and again, more and more we're saying, man, how could you tell the difference between a packet of McDonald's ketchup on an ear and blood? How could you tell? Because, hey, man, if I were running the deep state, if I were Dr. Evil, if I were running the Illuminati or what have you, the Bilderberg group, you couldn't come up with a better plan when you see this resistance is coming from these gun-toting Second Amendment types to the new world order you're trying to usher in, than to get this half-bright game show host to go and usher it in and call it Making America Great Again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, is she supposed to be this civil libertarian, too? I mean, that was a big plank of her campaigns, and now, just repeatedly saying we're going to what? We're going to prosecute, we're going to find the... That's what they are. These people, they are whistleblowers. They're whistleblowers. They keep coming out and keep trying to get the word out that there's no justification for this invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. And they're being stymied at every turn by, in this case, this woman who put herself forward as this great champion of the Constitution and of liberties and of freedoms. And this is being done in order to undermine our freedoms, in order to undermine our rights, in order to destroy due process, just like the Patriot Act. It's the same exact playbook as the neocons. These people, the woke warmongering neocons. That's what Tulsi used to talk about. Well, how the fuck are you different? Like, how is what this is any different? This is the exact same thing. This feels more like the Bush years than any time since the Bush years.
And I feel bad for all the girlfriends and wives who have to put on these Cruella DeVille wigs now for the left podcasters who have a Tulsi thing now. They're in many ways, this administration is the consummation of the Bush administration.
Yes.
The Bush administration was really the beginning of that facts don't matter truthiness, right? It was the beginning of this idea reality is what truth is what we say it is.
Yeah.
This is the logical endpoint of everything that Cheney, Rumsfeld, and the rest set in motion.
Right, because in order to actually realize the horrifying potential of those Bush-era policies, you needed to install in government people who do not feel constrained by the mythology of America,
right,
as
in
this
any
beacon
way.
on a hill.
Not
right?
at all.
Right. Because once you go totally mask off, all that pretense goes out the window. And George W. Bush, thug that he was cut from a cloth of American exceptionalists who really kind of have this vision of America, this sort of transcendent vision of America as an idea, as opposed to these people whose idea about America is just, well, hey, this is our land. What the money here is our money, and we need to fortress it off from the rest of the world. And how do we do that? We need to keep out people who are undesirable, not thinking through the consequences of that whatsoever. And anyone who gets in our way of that is a threat. And we just have to either get rid of them or lock them up. Therefore, this whole idea of America as a place that is intrinsically good by virtue, they could give a shit about that. And therefore, all of the infrastructure that George W. Bush built can now be weaponized against the people because the administration now knows no kind of restraint.
Yeah, even if you look at a Kissinger or a Cheney, they believed that this was realpolitik and it's a rough world. And it was basically you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. That was their logic. But the logic is, well, I have to be this so that you can enjoy your American freedoms. These guys, yes, as you say, they're past that.
Right.
They're past that. They don't even feel a need to justify what they're doing with those kinds of precepts.
No, this is just, and this is going to invoke.
It's not a means to an end. This is the end.
Exactly. And I know this might be a loaded thing to say, but I don't think it's an exaggeration at this point. This is just a blood and soil ideology. Like that is their vision. It doesn't.
When you look
at
these cabinet meetings,
there's
never been cabinet meetings like that in this country where you've got Pam Bondi feeling a need to, this is the Attorney General of the United States, to
Yeah.
praise the president,
Yeah,
like
exactly,
this,
yeah.
this is a meeting of the Politburo circa
Right.
1954. Thank you for being such an amazing president. Oh my God, you're so wonderful. That's sick. That's
Yeah.
sick. That is, dare I say it, un-American.
Yes. 100%.
Please clap.